Hey Greg, I gotta say, maybe right off the top, before we get into the interview per se, although maybe this will be part of the conversation anyways. I know I want to talk about some of the music and the recording you do now, but I really like that track you sent. I think it was called The Four Winds or something. It
Oh, the
was,
Four Winds Bar.
yeah, really good. So I guess like, what is your plan of attack right now? Like, are these new recordings you're working on, and you're gonna get that out at some point?
Yeah, so the Four Winds Bar, I stole the name of the bar from Sandy Pearlman in the Blue Oyster Cult song Astronomy. And Sandy was a good friend of mine. I always promised him that, somehow I would recycle that. Too bad he died before that happened. But in any case, yeah, that song, and I'm doing a whole LP of more songs. We're doing like one or two at a time, is produced by Scott Richardson, who was the singer-songwriter behind the Detroit psychedelic band in the 60s, SRC. And he's just a tour de force. He's an amazing guy. We bumped into each other about 7 years ago. He was living in a little wine village in the middle of nowhere in northern New Mexico, about an hour from me. And we just, I was a nuisance. I said, when I was a little kid, I listened to the first two SRC records ad nauseum, and can you at least sign them for me? And then he got a hold of Jan Uhelski, who was my editor at CREEM, and she sort of vouched for me that I wasn't just a pest to be a pest. And, uh, you know, and so we've been collaborating and working together, and he's produced the song Four Winds Bar, and we're doing a whole bunch of others two at a time every month or two.
It's great. Yeah, it really sounds amazing, actually.
Well,
Like
thank
just
you.
the fidelity. I mean, that's a weird thing to hone in on, but it just like sounded so striking the minute, it starts to play. So
Yeah,
just out of
I
the
think it,
laptop. So
I really think it's the best thing I've ever done. I mean, just in terms of a lot of respects, that song, I was in Flagstaff, Arizona, driving back home to Santa Fe. It's about 300 miles, and my Bluetooth and my whole sound system shut down in my car, and I had nothing. And I drove into Winslow, Arizona, which is a real dump, except for the Eagle statue, which is
yeah.
even more. And you
First thing
need
I thought of course, yeah, when you said that.
take it easy statue.
Yeah.
God. So I pulled into this coffee dump, and I was sitting down, and over their PA, their music PA, came the theme song from the old Western Rawhide. And I thought, yeah. And for the next 270 miles, I morphed the melody and the idea I had in my car over and over and over again until I came up with Four Winds Bar. And I thought, all right, the idea is that, in the Old West, these four riders are going into an opium bar to make a deal, and then it goes sour. So it's, sort of a nod to the last days of May also, I guess.
Great. Well, looking forward to it.
Yeah, thanks.
So I don't know if you guys noticed behind me, Wade knows I always kind of put a little something behind me as a little sort of teaser of what we might go into. And we won't spend a ton of time on this today, but I did some homework last night. I have like, probably
Pat
from
the
about
guitar.
probably from about 73 onward, I have, I'd say, 90 to 95% of all the Cream issues. I'm, a huge
Oh
fan of
man,
Cream growing up.
I wish I did.
Well, I thought I've got to, I've got to do my due diligence and see what I can,
Yeah.
specifically I can find of your own stuff. And of course, and this is last night. Keep this in mind. One of the first ones I come across, of course, is your profile of
Oh right,
Ozzy.
yeah. Yeah.
And then
He
today, of course, we should note, of course, Ozzy just died. So
he was the sweetest guy I've ever interviewed and been with. I mean, he took me to lunch to a Eastern Indian restaurant in Hollywood, and he showed me his pictures of his dog and his kids. He was just very genial and nice and sweet. I mean, it wouldn't be what you'd expect. And then he went and he sort of grimaced and goes, "That fucking bat! I didn't know it was a real bat. He said it was a prop." But he was good. And then I interviewed Lemmy in the same piece, and he was a
yeah,
sweet too. Go figure.
yeah. Well, I've got like a little stash of some of the creams that you did pieces for.
Oh, cool.
So we'll just, I'll sort of flash them on the screen, and if you have thoughts on them,
Okay.
obviously I didn't have time to reread them all, but I was, I sort of flipped through some, and some of them are actually quite interesting and kind of surprising too. Like some of the stuff, that I saw your bio. I mean, I don't know why it'd be surprising. I guess you would write about anything.
My favorite was the Ted Nugent LP review where I wrote it as a Dear Ted letter and suggested that he pick up a Gibson Melody Maker because they're great guitars to learn how to play on. And apparently he went ballistic in the paint offices. So,
What year would that have been around?
oh, I think it was of cat scratch fever, but I'm
Oh
not,
wow.
it might have been the one after it. And, I said, don't be ashamed of being a hack. It happens to all of us, but, uh, tighten your chops. And he wanted to hunt me with his bow and arrow, apparently.
Wow. Hmm.
But I got involved with Cream because of Meltzer. I was writing for this little fanzine called Backdoor Man in LA, and it was just sort of vitriolic hard rock things that a lot of stuff I didn't like, but a lot of stuff I did. And it caught Meltzer's attention, and he forwarded it to his friend, the editor Billy Altman, who liked what I did, and that's how I climbed aboard the Cream bandwagon.
Wow. And Backdoor Man, like I actually tried to see if there was any. I don't know if Wade has come across any because Wade's a genius when it comes to archival stuff. But I was trying to see if there was any kind of PDFs or anything online of it. All I could find was some covers here and there.
Yeah,
But it kind
there
of
are.
looked
I
like
mean,
a
there.
pre-punk fanzine. Is that sort of the idea almost?
Yeah, I mean, we did Patti Smith in 1975 when she put out Piss Factory. We did early Perubu. They like things like Aerosmith, which I didn't, but it was anything hard rock, sort of new rock, new punk rock. Uh, I loved the Dictators was my, big cause de celebre, and they tolerated me doing that. And they let me write a story about how I let my audiologist blast out my eardrums, testing my hearing but I insisted she play the first Blue Oyster Cult record.
No.
Yeah.
And Meltzer was a reader of the magazine, and he put you in touch with.
Yeah, I mean, we even had him do a piece called "I'm a Man."
Hmm.
And it was this whole litany about how he fucks harder than he ever used to, and on and on and on. It was just sort of beyond bombastic, of course. But at the end, he goes, "This is the biggest piece of shit I've ever written. They're paying me $100."
Wow.
And he goes, go and listen to your ZZ Top.
Yeah.
So, if we rewind a little earlier than that, I mean, I think I've listened to a few interviews with you and so forth, and you've talked fairly frequently about those revelatory moments, seeing the Stooges and of course seeing Rocky Erickson, who you also write about. And by the way, we will talk about your book too. So I haven't mentioned it yet, but we
Okay.
will get there
All right.
because you have a whole piece on Rocky Erickson in there.
Yeah.
But go back a little earlier than that, and if you're able to tie Meltzer Aesthetics of Rock into this, that'd be great. But you don't have to. But I'm just curious about your own sort of experiences growing up, getting into rock in the first place. Like you were born in the 50s, I think you said. So
55. Yeah.
was it like mid 60s and you were kind of like, preteen and you heard all the British invasion stuff or what? I just don't know. So,
Yeah, well, at age 13, 12, it was the summer of love. But I had an older brother that turned me on to a lot of stuff like that. I mean, the first three records that wore the grooves out of was the first Velvet Underground and Nico, the first Doors record, and SRC. And it just grew from that. I was always pretty much an academic dweeb. I'm a mathematician now, but or used to be. uh, but that always just drove me. And then when I saw Iggy and the Stooges in 1973 with James Williamson, that blew me out. And then, of course, I think you know the story of when Rocky played with Doug Somm at the Palomino impromptu. That threw me for a loop too. And then it was like there's no turning back.
actually, it occurred to me. And by the way, Wade, jump in anytime you want. I don't have to hog this whole conversation. But it did occur to me when I was thinking about this. It's interesting that both you and Richard Meltzer, if I'm correct on this, were both I think Meltzer himself did say he was mathematically inclined when he was.
Yeah, he told
school,
me
right?
he told me he was a math major at some
Yeah.
point, and so we talked shop a little bit. You know, he's such a brilliant guy. I mean, really highly, intellectually endowed, and so it's just that's always what I loved about Richard. It was just not just a passion, an irreverence, a sarcasm, an irony, but it was he put all those things together in a really funny and intelligent way. And when I first saw, caught my attention of Aesthetics of Rock, I mean, it's a hilariously funny book. And, but as I mentioned, it's so encyclopedic with everything. You know, he must have spent a lot of time doing that. And I believe he told me the story is that it was supposed to be his PhD dissertation, and he wrote it in crayon on napkins and stuffed it in a Beatles six album cover. That's the story. I don't know if he told me that or I'd heard that from someone else, but that sounds about right. And he thought, it was the 60s and there was all this sense of crassness and ridiculousness. And I guess he thought he wasn't trying to blow himself out. I think he thought that would fly if that story's true.
And,
Did you have a the first edition before you reviewed the second edition?
Yeah.
Yeah,
And he
and
mentions
was it
that.
as, sorry, go ahead. Sorry.
He mentions that story.
I don't think so.
Oh, okay. All right. I was
Yeah.
just curious.
So was it the aesthetics of rock? Like was that book your introduction to Richard Meltzer, or had you been familiar with him through other
No,
work?
I was familiar with his writings from Cream, from other stuff, Crawdaddy and things like that. So I was a huge fan, and I thought if I ever, do writing for any rock journal or something, I want to have that kind of brashness and irreverence. I mean, I think he told me also. I'm so old now, it's fuzzy, but that he wrote a album review for Cream in French. And there was one where he did it in a mirror, so it was all upside down and backwards. And I thought that's the spirit of rock and roll, not fucking Rolling Stone being, intellectual and categorizing everything. This is what it's meant to be about. The writing itself should be a passion and should be sort of a platform for being the same as the music it's talking about. And Meltzer embodied that to me.
Yeah. What about going through aesthetics of rock the first time? What were some things that really leapt out at you?
Well, just, as I said, the litany of just the analogies that he made, the how encyclopedic it was about just about everything you could imagine in terms of obscure and popular stuff. I loved his, synopsis on the Trashmen, if I remember correctly. It was just great reading, and I believe, and again, I'm old enough to not remember these things appropriately, but I believe it was the first real tome on rock music that came out.
It's
Yeah.
definitely right up there for sure. Yeah.
Yeah,
Besides maybe like Lillian Rocks and like
right.
her rock encyclopedia that came out and maybe a couple others like
Nick
Yeah,
Nick
the
Nick
first.
Cohn from England, Pop from the Beginning was
right.
a little before that, and that's a really irreverent and fun book as well. So
But aesthetics was humble in the sense that it didn't sound self-aggrandized, or it
hmm.
didn't sound like he was promoting himself with some sort of categorical knowledge. It was funny. It was all over the place, and that's what I loved about it. I mean, it was. I read the whole thing from start to finish when I got it, and of
That's
course
rare.
his other stuff like Gulcher and all the other things were great too.
What did you say, Wade? That's rare.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's pretty remarkable that you said you read it from start to finish. I mean, I did, but by the time I read it, I was in my mid 20s
Well,
and
I
early 80s.
admittedly I did it in doses. I mean,
Yeah,
I did, but I did. I mean, I started within 3 days. I had gone through the whole thing.
wow. And
Yeah.
do you remember at the time when you read it, like, did you feel you were absorbing much of what he was trying to say, or did you find it confusing, or a little bit of both, or you didn't worry about it, or
There's a little bit of both. I mean, the confusing part I appreciated because it was rambling and it was going in 76 directions at once. It,
Mhm.
it was sort of, like Burroughs writing about rock and roll, Naked Lunch of categorical, rock review.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, from the actual Cream review, this is something I just noticed today. You say Meltzer's writing bristles with a passion for the music and the music's passion for itself. And then when I was looking at the back of Hallucinations from Hell, he
Yeah.
writes his, meaning yours, body of work bristling with postmodern tenderness and passion.
I didn't catch that.
That's
That's
great.
funny. That's funny. I was thrilled that he wrote a little endorsement, Yeah, I love Richard. I wrote a song that's never been recorded, but it's called Hail, Mr. Vom.
Mm,
So
wow.
I got to finish it. I mean, he's a Richard's a treasure. He's always loved Blue Oyster Cult, and that the early Blue Oyster Cult anyway, and that was how I sort of climbed into his tent also.
And
Yeah.
so with the backdoor man thing, when he got to your stuff and recommended you to Cream, was that your first personal encounter with him, or?
I think my first personal encounter, and I don't remember if the heads up of his endorsement to Cream for me was before or just after this. It might have been just after, but he came to LA, and I don't know if he had moved there yet, but he was on a first visit, I think. And he and Metal Mike Saunders and I think there was one other person who I can't remember, went to lunch at some, surf fish shop on the Santa Monica Pier, and that's how I first met him, and I was just ecstatic. It was great. And again, we talked dictators because no one knew or no one cared unless you were from that part of New York, and at least in LA, and so it was sort of a what's the word? It was a promotion that that was important to us, spreading the word. That might have been the very last rock and roll project Meltzer really got into, I think,
Hmm. Hmm.
Other than Pagliaro.
Pagliaro? Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Richard really liked him.
Yeah, yeah, we've talked about that a little bit. Pagliaro from Montreal, actually. So
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Richard turned me on to that too.
did
Uh,
you mention? Sorry, go ahead, Wade.
yeah, the last time that we had an interview together, Greg and I, like we sort of ended on this sort of discovery, which was I'm in love with your mom. Is that about your mom, Greg?
Uh, you know, it
Tell
was
all.
it was his. I think I'm not sure what the inspiration was. That was his creation, except Saunders wrote the riff. And whenever we would come over to my folks' house where I was living, he would point and go, "I'm in love with your mom." Okay, it works. You know, and but that thing morphed into a Samoan song later on too. But that was the words were his creation. Most of the Vom stuff were his lyrics.
Yeah.
Electrocute your cock for sure.
Well, I mean, I imagine it rolled into something else, but when you had mentioned that at the very end of the interview, it's like, huh, I had never realized.
Wow, that's
Well,
great.
when the Samoans, there was this um, lunatic singer-songwriter from the 50s called Tony Khan. And Tony was this sort of rockabilly cat that wore this leopard skin coat and did all these ridiculous. He was sort of a early version unintentionally of Handsome Dick Manitoba. And he'd get on his back and kick his legs. And he had this semi-hit in, I think, early 60 or 61 called Like Wow. And so he was known, but somehow Gene Scolati and Meltzer, and Gene was another conduit to how I knew Richard. We would go to lunch all the time on Warner Brothers Ticket in Burbank. And but in any case, Scolati introduced us to Tony, and Tony was just over the top, and Meltzer loved him.
Hmm.
Uh, and we sort of groomed him to be an initial lead singer of the Angry Samoans
Wow.
for our first gig. Again, being too sycophantic of the dictators, thinking that was the model. And Tony went crazy. I mean, we got on stage and he sang "I'm in Love with Your Mom," and he came on with this douchebag full of milk and swung it around in the air like a lasso. And it went around his throat, and he turned red and couldn't breathe. And he fell down in the audience. The milk squirted out in the air. And that was the birthplace live of I'm in love with your mom. Meltzer was giving it the nod. Yes, this is right. This is the way to go.
I need
Wait,
to
I guess
check
in the
out his
interest of
body of work.
journalistic integrity, we should ask the follow-up question: Who electrocute your cock is about? We don't really need to know, but
You'd have to ask him.
yeah,
The line of, looking for a hand job, stick it in a clock was enough for me. That was great.
yeah. You
Yeah.
mentioned Mike Saunders. So, do you and him like is Cream your place of meeting with Mike Saunders, or like did you didn't grow up with it? You didn't grow up.
No, I met him in 1973. He was living in Hollywood, and he was this really quirky, strange guy who would plug in his guitar to a little mono amp and play Mark Bolan songs and imitate the voice. And then he had some really hilarious songs that he would write. There was one called "Getting High with Stephen Stills,"
Well,
and it got worse. And I thought, this guy's hilarious too. And so we started hanging out. He was a very eccentric dude, and that never ceased to be the case, but really, really funny, bright guy. So it just evolved that we would hang out more, and we both loved the Dictators. And he turned me on to the Dictators, in fact. And I think he got a hold of the original demo that Andy Chernoff recorded with the band, and we would live and breathe those songs all the time. So that was the genesis of how we started hanging out.
so yeah, there's so much to go into with you, and we're already touching on a lot of it. The whole VOM thing is, of course, quite interesting. What was the question I wanted to ask you about VOM? Well, I mean, how did it basically come together? I mean, so you knew Mike Saunders, you knew Meltzer both through writing gigs
Well, we were
mostly.
all hanging out. The union that glued us together was the Dictators again, but
Right, right.
we'd hang out with Richard, and the Renaissance to him, as bad as most rock music had evolved to, there were a few things, was the new wave, quote unquote, then early punk rock movement in L.A. And Richard's, it was just a breath of fresh air to him that, the garbage sound was anything not like any conventional sense of quality, I think. And we went to the Variety Arts Center, which is a downtown convention center in LA, and they were having a punk rock thing with the Weirdos, and Richard went nuts. He started dancing to the weird pogoing to the Weirdos, and you see, I can do it too. I can do it too. And that was the beginning of Vom.
Wow. And Rich, from my understanding, it kind of the band dissolved in part because Richard himself kind of lost interest, or I think he said something like he just didn't have the energy to do that sort of thing.
He always maintained before and after that moment that he was just physically beat to hell, that he just didn't have the stamina or the endurance to do it. I think there was an incident at the Whiskey A Go Go where we opened for the Dickies, where we were really going at it. We were getting a following. I mean, he loved the fact that it was sort of, I think, bad professional wrestling and rock and roll, punk rock and roll. We played this club. I'm getting off on a tangent here, but we played this club in Redondo Beach called Kahuna's Bearded Clam, honest to God.
Wow.
And we're playing on stage, and what we did is we threw all these bugs and insects and organic viscera at the audience. He and I went down to this place called Rainbow Mealworm and Bait Company in Compton, which is a gnarly area of LA. And we bought fresh frozen sheep eyeballs, and we couldn't buy roaches because we had a song called I Live with the Roaches. They wouldn't sell disease-carrying organisms, so we had to buy crickets. And so we threw all this crap out at the audience, And we would start with a barbed wire in the front of the stage with trash cans and dumped all the trash in mounds behind the barbed wire. So the idea it was an invitation to be a free for all. And that's what it got to really quick. There was one guy that night at the gig who took the melted wax from the lights on the table and started throwing it at us. And he looked like Bozo the Clown. I mean, just really like that. And it was chaos. And Meltzer looked just so happy. I've never seen him glowing like that.
Wow.
Except the owner of the club, we were throwing all the crickets and they chirped and that drove the owner crazy. So we had to fucking clean the crickets up till 3 in the morning
Wow.
until there was no chirping left. But anyway, I digress. I forgot what I was talking about
No, that's
before.
good. That no, well, it was about Meltzer kind of not having the stamina necessarily to
Okay,
continue with the project.
so we were opening for the Dickies at the Whiskey, and it got again chaotic, more bugs, more sheep eyeballs. People were throwing the eyeballs back at us. The whole whiskey reeked of like lamb stew, and it was getting crazier and crazier. And then Meltzer, who was holding the mic stand, accidentally bopped someone on the head and the person fell over. I mean, they were okay, and it was all part of the. I mean, I admittedly took a towel and wrapped it around the neck of Penelope, who was Kick Boy Face's girlfriend, and apologized to him the next week, and he goes, "Oh, do not apologize. It was a punk rock attitude. That was very good." But anyway, I think Meltzer was got carried away and he felt terrible about that. And I think that's one of the contributing factors where he's realized he was getting too carried away and sort of losing it. I could be totally wrong with that, but that was my sense of it too. And we,
Yeah,
by the way, on that Dickie show, the sound guy and the manager of the whiskey stopped our set halfway in the middle, turned off the power, and said, "Get out of here. There's only one asshole I've kicked out on the street, and you're going the same way, and that was that asshole Morrison." And Richard was just glowing. Yeah, all right, okay, all right.
That badge of honor.
Yeah. So but it was a lot of fun. We played for about a year and a half, I think, I think that long. And it
Wow.
just got more and more out of control. And the more chaotic and anarchic it got, the more Richard was happy.
Wow.
And it was fun being in a band with him. I mean, and then years after, he got really sort of embarrassed about it, I think, or just would, say, Vom sucked. They were shit. And we did suck and we were shit, but it was a lot of fun. And I think in a vintage appraisal, uh, I think Vom looks pretty good these days compared to what
Yeah.
else is going on. And Meltzer, I think, every time he and I would talk about it, he seems more fond of looking backwards towards it, I think.
The video for "I'm in Love with Your Mom" is fantastic. I mean,
Yeah.
that's
No,
a
it
great
was
video.
Richard Casey, who did some Samoans videos too, did that, and he did one of them where we were coming up on the beach, and he was great. It was all. I had a great experience, although this was 76, so I was only 21, and anything seemed great when you're that age,
Wow.
especially with Meltzer.
perfecto.
I'm in love for the first time. I'm in love with your mom. Got a lump in my pants for her. I'm the son of fun. Making out, shacking up, it's just really hot. But your mommy, it's a yummy, something you are not. I'm in love with your mom.
Um, Wade, why don't you dive in? Actually, we're back.
Well, sure. Like, so the last time we talked, I had been reading Hallucinations from Hell, and we talked a bit about Rocky for a bit.
Yeah.
But I was hoping that maybe this time around, uh, just to veer away from Meltzer talk just for a moment, could you talk a little bit about that Hunter S. Thompson story that appears in
Well,
Hallucination?
let me back up for 1 second and say about the book is that there were sort of two criteria I was shooting for when I started putting it together. One is that it wasn't going to be a musical memoir like Keith Morris's Circle Jerks thing. I mean, there was nothing wrong with that. It just had been, John Doe, just a whole list of people. And I thought that was getting tired already. So I just wanted to be sort of anecdotes from things that I observed all around me. I mean, like Meltzer and I think Lou Reed a little bit, I've always been sort of a journalistic voyeur. So things would happen where I'd sit down and just see all this shit going around me and mentally transcribe it. And so that was the impetus behind the stories. The other thing was that I wanted the writing because it's when I would tell all these stories to friends who were sick of them already, and they said, "Just put it down in a book."
Hmm.
So I thought, all right, I didn't want to wear out my welcome too much, with the oral narratives. But I thought the writing those kind of stories is different from just telling them, and I wanted the narrative, the written narrative, to have a lot of energy and punch. I wanted to be sort of beatniky. I wanted it to be sort of a little Burroughs, a little Ginsberg, a little even Kerouac, whatever. But I wanted the wording and the sound of the words and the whole thing to have a drive describing what was going on in those stories. So that was my target. If that came across, I'm happy. As far as the Hunter S. Thompson thing, that was crazy. I mean, I was trying to get an interview for him with Cream, and it was set up. He was doing his Q&A at a community college not far from where I resided in Claremont, California when I was doing my graduate degree. And I tried, I'm a huge Hunter fan, and I thought, oh, this would be just great. My first experience was going to that Q&A and then going backstage, and he wasn't there. And he had this assistant, Maria, who I think I called her something else in the story, but she said, "Well, Hunter is a little indisposed right now." And I thought, uh-oh. And he comes out of the bathroom with, it looked like white pancake makeup, but it was, I think, Coke.
Wow.
And it was just all over the place, bellowing like a stuck whale. So there wasn't anything to go from that point on. And the next time I saw him, he was staying at this really conservative geriatric hotel next to Claremont near the colleges. And I was supposed to pick him up the next day. This was Friday, and I was supposed to pick him up Saturday at lunch to take him to Ontario Airport and do the interview in the car. And I was all psyched. And about 15 minutes of midnight on Friday night, the day before, the assistant phones me and says, Hunter's having a little bout with the flu. Is there an all-night pharmacy that can give him some help? She goes, I'm sure you know what I mean. And I'm a dweeb, to a fault. I don't do drugs really. And I didn't know. I mean, I should have. It's Hunter Thompson. But, still, I thought, well, Walgreens is still open. I'm sure I can give you some ibuprofen. And there's this long silence on the phone. Well, he was thinking a little bit more to carry him through the night so he can hit his deadline. He said, you'd understand. I said, well, what does he want? Oh, he would like a little pretty as pure as possible cocaine. I thought, oh, and I thought, what? Of course. What was I thinking? I said, well, how much does he want? Just out of curiosity. He goes, oh, about 20 pounds. If that's a lot, right? And she goes, well, it's not for me. It's all for him. And he understands, blah, blah, blah. So I said, well, I'm sorry. I really can't get that kind of quantity or anything. I said, she goes, oh, he'll be so disappointed. He hopes he can still do the interview. And I said, well, I hope he can too. At 3 in the morning, I get a call and she goes, Hunter is now accepting the fact that you can't get that kind of quantity. He was wondering perhaps, well, if you could get some unstepped on brown Mexican heroin, he would accept that as an alternative. That's, I don't know, my heroin hotline has really gone dead. And, she goes, oh, he's going to be really, he thought for sure that's something you could do if you couldn't get the Coke. I said, no. And then at 6 in the morning, and this is all in the story, I think, that she phones again, whispering on the phone now, and says, look, he's done his research and he knows at the engineering college, Harvey Mudd, that a lot of students were busted for making PCP in the basement. I said, yeah, where is this going? She goes, well, in order to make PCP, it has to be cut with ether. And he was wondering if you could get him 8 tanks of ether. And I said, oh, well, why didn't you say that at first? Sure, I'll just phone all my buddies and see if we can get a whole bunch of ether to get them. And I said, I'm really sorry. She says, oh, well, he's really discouraged. I heard in the background this voice going, And so at noon the next day, when I was supposed to meet them, I came to the desk and I said, I'd like to talk to the Thompson party. And he goes, all I have is the party of Raoul Duke. I said, that's it. And he goes, you know them? I said, well, no, of course, is a strong word. I'm supposed to do a talk with them, an interview. I'm a journalist. And he goes, you tell those motherfuckers no one comes into my hotel and drills a deadbolt into the door. I thought, okay. He's screaming at me. And then she phones. I forgot if it was on my cell or whatever it was. And she goes, meet us. She goes, what time does your watch say? And I said, about 12:05. Meet us at 12:30 prompt by the second palm tree in the parking lot. And I said, second palm tree? She goes, yeah. As you go out the door, you'll see one, and then the second one will be there. And I go to the second palm tree and nothing, 10 minutes, 30 minutes, nothing. And I look around and I see a door where the deadbolt must have been there, but now there's just a hole. And I run to the room and the door is sort of swinging. I don't think the cleaning crew had been in there yet. And there's piles of crunched up paper and used tampons, which I'm told later is what people use for nosebleed stoppers, and on and on and on, and just disheveled like a tornado had hit it. But I took all the paper, and one paper had a typewriter on it that said, the dark, dank atmosphere, the turgid black air crashed down on on the college community, and I thought, oh my God. So I took a big brown bag and start stuffing it all in there. Still somewhere at my folks' house in the garage is, next time I'm down, I got to look for it. But that was the Hunter story, and the interview went south. He never showed up, and that was the end of it. But that was the sort of the impetus for the story in the book.
Isn't that amazing?
Well, yeah, I'll tell you the sequel to that was about 6 years later. I was involved in a legal lawsuit with my university that I was at. It's a long story. There was a criminal who was the president and tried to get rid of a lot of the Anglo faculty and deny us tenure. And then they fired me because I wrote an op-ed in the local paper. And so in that hiatus, um, where I was unemployed, because in math circles, especially and at the university level, if you have a hole in your record for not continual employment, that's considered a pretty big blemish, and the market was pretty competitive already. So I panicked and took a job at Boise State University in Boise, Idaho. And I drove up there and I went through Aspen and went to the Woody Creek Tavern, and not because I thought he was going to be there. I didn't even know. Well, he had suicided, I think, about 6 months before that. And I didn't know anything about what was going on or whatever. But that was the weekend they were having the celebration at his ranch where Johnny Depp and Bill Murray and all those people were there. And they were going to shoot off this obelisk into the air and have like a football of his ashes explode in the air. And I didn't realize that was the next day. And I walked into the tavern and it was mobbed. There were like all these women on top of each other making out on the floor. There was Johnny Depp and Bill Murray at the bar. It was just all hell broke loose. And there was all this puke and vomit outside in the precipice of the club. And I thought, what the fuck? I still didn't get it. I mean, I'm so
Wow.
stupid sometimes. And I went back to my hotel and I said, what is going on? They said, well, it's Hunter's memorial tomorrow. I said, oh my God. And I drove up Woody Creek and isn't far from Aspen. And I drove up the road to his ranch, but I didn't get very far because there's all this security. And I went back into town and thought, all right, I've got to do this. I've got to take every artifact I remember from when I went into that hotel room. I got all these packs of Dunhill cigarettes. I got tampons. I got, all the stuff I could remember. And I took it in a bag. And before the security could stop me, I parked below on the road and threw it in a gully, just as a symbolic gesture, and then went on my way back to Boise. So
Wow.
that was the postscript.
I think one of those items was like a jar of peanut butter.
Yeah, right. There was that too. Right. There was peanut butter in the room. God knows what that was for. Nutrition. I don't know.
Just an observation about that Hunter S. Thompson story, which I really do like in the book. Um, I think Richard Meltzer actually is very good at doing this too. It's one of those stories where you say a lot about the subject without actually being, in your case, being able to actually make
Encounter.
contact with the subject, right? It's kind of fascinating, and that just is sort of transpired. Like I think it's a really it's a great piece. It should show up in an anthology at some point about Hunter
Right.
S. Thompson, and really the only contact you have with him is you see him with coke all over his face early on in the book,
Right. Yeah.
or
Well,
about the publicist and all that. So.
that's what I wanted the idea to be. I mean, it should be about him. It should be in the spirit of him. It should be whatever it was, but surrounding him, not next to him. That was what I was going for. So if that came across, I'm thrilled.
And I think Richard Meltzer did that in some of his music writing, right? Like he got criticized a lot for that. Like when he would write these wild reviews in the 70s and stuff where he wouldn't even be talking about the band. He'd, you know, be
Well, it
writing
was
about whatever, like some other subject entirely. But he's in doing that now. You can read that just purely as fucking around and fun too, and that's completely
yeah,
valid way to take it in, and that's probably
right.
the ultimate value of it. But there, he is saying something with doing that too, right? He's saying
No,
something about the process of where rock and roll was at that point.
it's
And all
it's
that stuff.
attitudinal. It's you know, I always like narratives and descriptions of people and what's going on from a distance. I think if you can, it's hard to do, and if you could do it in a sort of candid way, it tells more of the whole picture than just talking to someone or just describing someone, you know. So that influenced me heavily. I mean, most of my writing. To a fault, maybe in the beginning, was trying to not imitate Richard, but do it in that spirit. And certainly, I wanted to become a writer because of Richard. It just turned me on the kind of stuff that he did and how irreverent it was. And but it conveyed like an attitude. It conveyed a spirit. It conveyed a passion that in itself mirrored what he was talking about. And I thought that's really hard to do. He didn't get credit enough for that.
Mhm.
Well, when I was looking for things about hallucinations from hell, I revisited this interview you gave in this book, Left of the Dial. And
Hmm.
something I think many might not know is that you've also become a playwright.
Well, I don't know if I become one. I had some ideas about it. I wrote this one script that never amounted to something called Hell's Whores. Um, but yeah, no, that was a project or a couple of them that I thought I was going to do, but I never sort of got planted in the ground for it.
Oh, well, yeah, it seemed like it was pretty inspired at that moment.
Yeah, well, it probably was. I mean, there are a lot of projects that just never amounted to anything that I was involved with. But now that I'm theoretically retired, although I'm going back part-time for work, I have time and I want to do all these things, you know. So that's the volition of wanting to create crap was is never lost on me. I mean, it's kept me going musically and it's kept me going in terms of, the book, doing writing and you know, it's just something that I think once you lose that, you lose the whole uh, uh, project of living, at least for me.
Yeah, keep creating.
Yeah, I mean, it's if that's part of yourself, you can't let it go. I mean, because that's what's meaningful. I mean, otherwise, what do you do? Stare at the wall?
Yeah,
You
what's
know,
Wheel of Fortune?
right? You know, sort of.
Um, I want to dial it back a bit just to the Samoans for a minute. There's two pressing questions on my mind about the Samoans.
Yeah.
Samoans and rock critics. Again, in doing my due diligence for this discussion, I knew I had some books on my shelf that would have some reviews of your work with the Samoans, and I'm just wondering if you'd paid any attention to that stuff at the time, and as you being a critic yourself, what you thought of. So the books in question where your work is cited, and I found four citations. Three were effusive in their praise, more or less, and
Yeah.
the other one was kind of a more negative. So Chris Gow in his record guide gives your first two records an A, a solid A, and
Yeah.
his reviews of those are actually pretty great. He says something like it. I think it's, I can't remember. I think it's about the first album. He says it's the most offensive record I've ever liked, or something like
Right. Yeah.
that. Chuck Eddy in Stairway to Hell also
Yeah.
lists both of your first two records, I think, in his top 100. He has one great line, I think.
Yeah.
He compares he says something like he calls My Old Man's a Fatso the best song of its type since the Coasters Yakety Yak, which I thought was pretty insightful. Actually, I really
I
like
think
that.
I remember that. Yeah.
That was great. And the one, well, it's a little more hedged, maybe, is that you do make the Spin Alternative Record Guide. I think Eric Weisbart, I think he kind of hedges a little bit on the first record. Actually, interestingly, he says it's just way too much of a rock critics type of record, but he loved the second album. And then the one where it's a bit wishy-washy, and it's, I mean, in my opinion, it's kind of a wishy-washy guide to begin with, is
Yeah.
the Trouser Press record guide. You do get reviewed in there too, but they seem to have a bit more of a bone to pick with you guys. But I don't know, just talk in general a little bit about what it was like to read reviews of your work when you're out there also reviewing bands and stuff at the same time. Or did you even pay attention to that stuff?
Well, you can't really dial that too much and internalize that kind of feedback for what you're doing and how you want that to affect you. I mean, we did sort of have a cross to bear that Saunders, me, and Meltzer were critics, and
Mhm.
so there was a lot of negativity about critics bands at the time. I mean, Lester did his band, and there were others. But the mainstay of the Samoans, what we wanted was to be a hybrid of Rocky Erickson and the Dictators, funny but crazy. So it had this psychedelic sense to it in terms of the music and drive to it. On the other hand, we wanted it to have sort of tongue-in-cheek, humor in terms of how stupid it could be. And My Old Man's a Fatso was about song. He wrote it about his dad, and then the dad died, and he wouldn't play it anymore. It's the way
Mhm.
things go. And all our stuff. I mean, the only song on Back from Samoa, the second record that I sort of regret is this one called Homosexual. And if I could take anyone off the record, any song off the record and trash it, it would be that. But not, it wasn't an anti-homo song. It was sort of to be ambivalent homo, just because I thought that never happened before. And it was also a parody of Fear, who were really, redneck guys that were serious about that shit. So we put it on there just because Fear was hot at the time and thought people would either laugh at it and saying this is really dumb, or in the same sense, it would be like, well, this is roasting Fear in terms of being serious about something like that. But it didn't. I mean, and in vintage, people look at that and they're offended. And I thought, God, I mean, it didn't become clear, and it's not the kind of thing, especially these days, being that unwoke about something like that in context now that I sort of feel bad about. But other than that, there was a funny story is the record's been reissued on Triple X Records, all of them actually. And there was what's the Epitaph Records? I know, was it Epitaph or was it one of those? I think it might have been, but anyway, one of those indie labels back east that were doing really well. Um, the two A&R guys wanted to reissue the records on their label, and they were a big indie operation. And they told me, I said, well, we're gay, but we love homosexual. I
Mhm.
said, well, okay, I don't feel too bad now. And they had the contract signed up with a lot of money to reissue, and everything was good set. And it went to the president of the record label, and he got so viscerally pissed off and upset. The story is he took Back from Samoa into the bathroom, stepped on it, broke it in pieces, and pissed on it. And I thought, if we could have had a crystal ball when we made up that record and looked into the future and saw that, boy, would that have been validating.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that segues, and in many ways, you've kind of gone into this already, but and I have to be the schmuck to kind of ask a question like this, but
Yeah.
it is an honest question, and my friend Phil Dello and I talk about this all the time in relation to lots of stuff. He's the guy who did the article I sent to you on
Right.
the Samoans, but like I don't know, could there be an angry Samoans in 2025? I'm not sure there could be. I mean,
Well,
and I'm not sure
unfortunately,
how I feel about that. Like it's just
well,
that kind of I mean, it's a complicated question to me because I don't think it's apparent necessarily. Like what you hear on the surface is not necessarily what it's all about, but it's all in the eye of the listener or the ear of the listener too, right? So it's
well,
I don't
it
know.
was a matter of us being wise-assed, anarchic teenagers that were into offending, into being funny, into just being kids. And we were a band from the San Fernando Valley, not at all part of the Hollywood scene. And doubling down on that, we thought the culture of celebrity and fame and pseudo notoriety in Hollywood was just disgusting. I mean, from Kim Fowley to Rodney to all the sycophants that would just sell their souls to be have a pledge of allegiance for any attention, which isn't what punk rock was supposed to be in the first place. It was supposed to be sort of the opposite of that. And so we that was where the Rodney song came into place and Get Off the Air, I mean, became prescient because Rodney's been revealed as a pedophile and his litigation against him now for sexual abuse and when he had the English disco. And the line we had in the song was 8 p.m. and Rodney's on the air. He's beating off in Joan Jett's hair. And I thought, I mean, people were saying when the trial came out, when the trial, when the litigation first surfaced, that this was going on about a year or two ago. Um, all of a sudden we were like being told we were prescient in terms of, reporting all that. To answer your question is, could it happen? There really wouldn't be the targets anymore
Yeah,
for us
yeah.
anyway to
It's
recreate
about the
that.
targets. Yeah,
The sense of having that kind of hostility and fun with it, geriatric, is sort of after the fact. Our drummer now is using the name Angry Samoans to play gigs, and it's like it's fake Samoans except for him. He didn't write any of the songs or sing. He was an add-on from the classified ads after Saunders and I created the band, and he's using the name now. And I was thinking of suing him, but cease and desist legally is expensive and really hard to push forward. So I think pretty much it's what it was. It's what it was at that time, and that's how it should be sort of
yeah.
consecrated if such a thing is appropriate.
Nowadays, it's kind of like MAGA assholes who kind of
Well, right.
take on, and the problem is that their targets. Well, sort of like you said about fear, I guess. I'm not saying fear or MAGA. I don't know anything about
Yeah,
fear,
yeah.
but it's the targets are there isn't the irony there or the distance. It's they're just out and out assholes and they're cruel to people. So it's a different time. So
Well, and it was, at the time we were as self-deprecating as anything else. I mean,
mm,
in you stupid asshole, he said, "You're a stupid asshole, baby. I'm one too." And
yeah,
and it was that if you listened to any of it or got the drift of it, it was making fun of yourself and being, sort of candid about how stupid everything was, including yourself. And that's certainly not MAGA. I mean, but
yeah,
on the
yeah,
other hand, the offensiveness, which again was sort of tongue in cheek, there's no irony or sense of humor anymore about that. You're right. I mean, it's pathetic and depressing.
yeah, yeah. Did Angry Samoans ever make it to Canada? Did you ever play in
Yes,
Canada?
we played Vancouver
Hmm.
in the Old Town French Quarters, and it was a great show. Now you can't even cross the border.
Oh yeah, I mean, 95% of the people I know right now won't even go to the US. They're checking
Right.
people's phone.
No, and
They're
you can't
literally
go.
checking people's phones and shit for their social media, right?
Right. No, you can't go
Especially
over there
people of
now.
color, but everyone basically. So it's
Well,
terrible.
honestly, I mean, the hope is that in these dark times, that like under Reagan, that the brutality of the medium of politically could inspire a lot of rebound creativity and rebound anger. Whether that's the case or not, I don't know, because the this generation growing up doesn't have that sense of. I mean, it's all you know social platform media that's conditioned these people not to react in an angry way, and it's not funny anymore. I mean,
Yeah.
it's really scary to me,
Mm.
and I don't know how far this is all going to go. I mean, we could evolve to a point that people are scared to write songs on a record for the repercussions. I
It
don't know.
seems like I mean, we're kind of like in a self-policing state now too. I don't think people could create without scrutiny that is so immediate.
Right.
And whereas, you know, you can learn to have regret. Like there used to be a Friends band that used to say something along as just like what was it? Um yeah, nobody needs their phase anymore.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
It's terrifying. I'm an old lefty, socialist lefty from the 60s, and I campaigned for Eugene McCarthy and George McGovern, and we got wiped out. But all of us back then were saying, well, the upside of this is that these dinosaurs are all going to be dying off, and we're the ones that are going to be left. And what the fuck happened? I mean,
Yeah.
it's worse than anyone could have ever imagined.
Oh, yeah,
And
I remember in the Bush 2 era, the big line going around was like, oh, all these, all these Bush supporters, they're all, they're all getting old, and that kind of thinking is going by the
right.
wayside. And it's like, what the fuck? Not at all. I mean, it's the opposite, right? So,
Well, right. And what's left are the bush vampires.
yeah,
It's with the ones with fangs drooling venom.
yeah, yeah.
Anyway.
Kisses me a good night. I feel so funny, a real god now. I need my